The grass isn't always greener, as Segaiden episode 40 ably demonstrates. Any American who remembers looking at game magazines in the 1990s remembers the sense of envy we felt as we looked at the import sections, packed with games featuring great graphics and about zero chance of ever coming to the US. But thanks to emulation and other various techniques that have lowered the barrier to entry for importing, we've eventually come to realize that most of those games remain stranded overseas for good reason. Games such as Comical MachineGun Joe. A shooting gallery-style action game, but not the fun kind, like a shooting gallery. Comical MachineGun Joe plays like the lost bastard child of games like Big Panic and, Devastators? Although it doesn't scroll forward like the latter, it gives you control of a playable character who can run and jump around. Enemies appear all around the screen and you need to shoot them. Pretty standard video game stuff, and certainly nothing remarkable at a basic conceptual level. No, Comical MachineGun Joe gets weird and bad when it comes to the specifics. Our hero, Joe, is a squatty little guy who wields a machine gun with a remarkably low rate of fire, and which can be aimed at a pretty wide variety of angles that make it possible to hit targets across the screen rather than doing the default Space Invaders thing of only firing upward. Unfortunately for Joe, enemies also wield guns and can fire even more precisely than he can. Their bullets streak fast across the screen and leave you very little time for evasion, forcing Joe to remain on his toes at all times. You can evade enemy attacks by moving quickly out of the way if you're lucky, but because the incoming projectiles zip across the screen, you really need to be able to predict when and where the attacks are coming from. But no worry, Joe can also jump to evade, leaping out of the way of attacks, a trick the heroes of Space Invaders and Galaxian certainly never had in their repertoire. If only this had any value whatsoever. Sadly, Joe is one of the least athletic leapers I've ever seen in a video game. While Joe can leap, and you can achieve good hang time in doing so, actually launching the little guy into the air involves a sort of charge-up time. Joe does not simply spring from the ground at the tap of a button. Rather, the tap of a button causes him to gather up the strength to leave the ground, and there's nearly a second of lag between you pressing the jump button and Joe actually jumping. This makes the jump command almost entirely useless, rather than a valuable tool in your arsenal. Evidently, the comical in Comical MachineGun Joe refers to the fact that Joe is a laughingstock. With such frustrating mechanics and relentless, unfair design, Comical MachineGun Joe doesn't play well by any standard, making it another underwhelming MyCard title. I don't think the MyCard's limitations as a format are to blame for this game's failures, though. The real root of the issue is that it's just not a well-designed game, period. This would not be the final MyCard release, but it would be the final Japan-exclusive MyCard title. Given the format's track record, I say, good riddance and go to hell. Mark III's second and final exclusive title for 1986 brings us a licensed release. This one, based on the anime and manga High School Kimengumi, feels almost like an unofficial follow-up to a game that had appeared on SG-1000. One of the final Mark III releases for 1986, High School Kimengumi explores new ground in licensing for the console. By this point, the system had seen Teddy Boy Blues, which licensed a tune by singer Yoko Ishino for an unrelated action game, Spy vs. Spy, a conversion of First Star's competitive trap-laying game based on Mad Magazine, Gokuwako Dome Dump Matsumoto, which featured the likenesses of pro wrestlers, and Ashura, which lost its US Rambo license in Japan. This is a game based on a popular manga and anime franchise that has never ever been localized into English. And if the quality of this game is any indication of the larger property, we've dodged a bullet with far more grace than Comical MachineGun Joe could, because this interpretation of High School Kimengumi deserves a failing grade. As far as I can tell, the High School Kimengumi series highlighted the misadventures of 5 ugly, unpopular high school boys who somehow befriended the cutest girl in school, and then comically fumble their way through school events and competitions alongside her. It doesn't seem like much of a premise to me, but maybe it was meant to be aspirational to its target audience. Yeah, maybe you boys will never be attractive or likable, but perhaps someday a single girl in the world will treat you with platonic courtesy. And here we have a video game adaptation of the property which sets its aspirations equally low. You play not as the five little loser guys, but rather as their collective crush, Yui, who wants to capture them all after they do something. They knock her friend unconscious with, I have to assume, their ugly looks. So Yui decides to track them down and, well, honestly, I don't know, take them to jail or something, I guess. This process plays out in the form of a rudimentary maze chase game in which you make your way through the school, acquiring items that will help her in her mission. You travel from room to room, opening desks and grabbing objects, avoiding random dudes, and attempting to find key items or perform specific actions that will lure the horrible little goblin men into striking range for you to immobilize them. These actions range from tossing them a love letter to playing piano in order to inspire one of them to dance like a ballerina. Once you manage to perform the requisite action, you can tie the dude up with a rope, at which point Yui's friend storms into the room and punch your captive off of the screen. All that's missing here is a reverse angle in which we see the kicked dude disappear into the sky with a tiny twinkle. The moment-to-moment action bears an odd similarity, as I mentioned earlier, to Konami's Mikey, which had appeared the year before in SG-1000 as Shinyushain Torukun, which, like this game, was also pretty much entirely wretched. Classrooms in high school Kimengumi's high school comprise the bulk of the rooms you need to navigate, where you move from desk to desk and search their contents in pursuit of goodies. Usually you'll just find random fruit, clothing, a frog that skitters off the screen, or bugs that wander between the desks. Sometimes though you'll encounter a key item that you can use or throw, such as chalk that briefly stuns a target, a harmonica you can play to distract everyone on screen, or an eraser that surrounds its victim with a cloud of blinding chalk dust. Ultimately, you want to find the key item associated with a specific little annoying guy, which you then use to debilitate them. I have to assume that these items are character specific and tie into the personalities they demonstrate in the show, which makes your objectives almost entirely inscrutable to those of us in regions where high school Kimengumi has never been localized. According to the notes for the fan translation available on romhacking.com, you can beat this game in a few minutes once you know where to find the requisite items and how to use them. So this strikes me as a game that relies on opaque design and a lot of fumbling around for invisible items and unintuitive actions in order to pad its length. What fun! It also continues the 8-bit Sega trend of giving the Mark III audience far more female protagonists than Master System owners saw. Though in this case, that's just as well. A localized release of a game this lousy might have done more to set back women's rights than the current Supreme Court. We Americans didn't really miss much on Master System in '86, huh? Sega's lack of third-party support would bite the company in the ass before long, but compare the kind of Japan-exclusive garbage that flooded the Famicom beginning in 1985 to the fact that only 2 Mark III titles turned out poorly enough to remain stranded in Japan, and that almost everything to see localization was pretty solid. Master System only had a few dud US releases in 1986, namely My Hero, Great Hockey, and F-16 Fighting Falcon, and all of those were at least interesting failures. Shout out to Sega of America for recognizing the 2 genuine failures in the mix this year and leaving them safely quarantined overseas. Special thanks this episode to Ali Belrose for providing a custom RGB cable that has greatly improved the video quality of Master System works for future episodes. Sorry if the American launch era footage looked a little janky. Next time on Segaiden, we celebrate the upgrade by getting back to the good stuff.